It is just so amazing how really being in tune to your body instead of jumping to conclusions and saying, I can never eat this again, really thinking of it as being curious and working on a project and seeing what the boundaries of tolerance are, which can be a little uncomfortable sometimes, but then figuring out how to work that in as your microbiome and your immune system kind of change. I have a similar experience to you with dairy. I actually used to have an anaphylactic reaction to dairy growing up. Totally dangerous. Throat swells up, like really uncomfortable, really scary. In the last year, so I was talking about, my perimenopause adventure, which, some things I've had some negatives, but actually one of the good things is all of a sudden I can tolerate dairy.
Welcome to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. It is time to make nutrition part of the conversation. I'm your host, Christina Veselak, and I'm so glad you're here. Did you know that it's our brain's job to allow us to cope with stress gracefully? But to do that, it needs to be fed optimally. Have you ever wondered why so many committed people relapse or maybe even die? Why so many people on psychotropic medication still feel lousy and still have cravings? What if the missing piece is food, the right food? What if the right nutrients like amino acids or even eating protein every 4 hours could actually balance your brain chemistry and your mood without medication and support lasting recovery? In this podcast, we explore the powerful connection between feeding your brain well, mental health, relapse, and recovery from addiction. We will share insights from experts, inspiring recovery stories, and practical strategies you can use today. Whether you're in recovery, a healthcare professional, or someone passionate about emotional well being, this show is for you. Let's dive in and discover how fueling your body and brain with the right food, the right amino acids, and other key nutrients can fuel your transformation today. Welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition, where we talk to ordinary people sharing their amazing recovery stories, clinicians, and researchers. And today I am very privileged to hold a conversation with Mickey Trescott. Now, Mickey is an author, a nutrition professional, and leading voice in the Autoimmune Protocol community, which is why I wanted to interview her because so many people in recovery are struggling with autoimmune disorders. She holds a Master of Science in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine and has supported autoimmune clients in private practice since 2013. As co-founder of Autoimmune Wellness, she helped to grow AIP from a small online community into a globally recognized research-supported protocol, which is so cool. I want to hear all about it. She has collaborated with medical researchers studying AIP for conditions including inflammatory bowel disease, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, rheumatoid arthritis, and psoriasis, and co-created the AIP Certified Coach Practitioner Training Program, which has trained more than 1,000 providers worldwide. That's really cool. She is the author of the award-winning and best-selling books, including The New Autoimmune Protocol, which introduces the first major update to AIP in over a decade. She lives near Portland, Oregon, with her husband, Noah. So welcome, Mickey.
Wow, thank you so much, Christina. I'm excited to be here.
So I'm really curious about what got you studying nutritional, functional nutrition and into the whole autoimmune world.
Yeah, so I mean, my story really starts as an autoimmune patient myself. I was 26, kind of newly graduated college and living in Seattle when I started to have some symptoms that eventually led me to a diagnosis of two autoimmune conditions. So I went through a couple years of really struggling a lot with my health as a young person, going to the doctor and really having my concerns being dismissed over and over. I have Hashimoto Hashimoto's disease and celiac disease, which I ultimately found out and got those diagnoses. But I was told that my thyroid levels were normal and that there was no treatment that the doctors could offer me. So I kind of, at the time, I didn't really, wasn't able to work. I was just really mostly confined to my house. Even just going up and down the stairs, more than twice a day was really hard. And I kind of lived in this three-story shared living situation that was just really challenging to really figure out what was next for my life and how I was going to exist with this level of illness. And so I actually had for right out of college, I was had the pleasure of graduating in 2007, which meant we were right starting that crash, and there were not a lot of jobs, especially for people like me who studied music. So I actually got my first job in a household as a assistant, like private chef. And I worked under other actually trained chefs. I had no experience, but I was really interested in food. I was interested in cooking and nutrition. So I had a lot of exposure to learning different cooking techniques. Some of these chefs actually had backgrounds in like Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic cooking. So I kind of picked up some things from them, definitely not formal, but it planted this seed that then a few years later, when I got sick, I started thinking maybe nutrition could have a role to play in my health and my healing. And that's really how it all started for me.
Serendipity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 It's interesting how, it's interesting how life works out. And, I kind of found myself with a lot of time. I really didn't feel well. So cooking was really hard, but I did have a lot of time to research. Back then, we didn't have the access to information that we have now, but there was, pretty good body of
Right.
articles and things that I was finding online just about autoimmune disease and nutrition. And that's kind of what got me started on this path to discovering the autoimmune protocol and really diet and lifestyle strategies to live well with autoimmune disease. And it's ultimately how I recovered my health kind of in that initial way and then inspired me to go back to school, study some more nutrition and do what I do now.
Nice. That's really cool. I remember when I was 26, I was also barely functioning. I had undiagnosed celiac disease. It finally got identified when I was 30 and was barely functioning, right? I went to a nutritionist and I said, "Can you figure out what's wrong with me? I've been ill my whole life. The doctors just say I'm fine because all my test results say I'm fine. So, of course, I'm fine." And, because I was one of those people who wanted to go to med school. My whole life, I wanted to go to med school, but when I got out of college, I didn't have the stamina to make it through med school. I had the smarts, I had the grades, I didn't have the stamina. So I can really relate to how you were feeling at age 26 when it kind of all came crashing down. And yes, I've been gluten free for 40-ish years.
Yeah, it was
So
probably
you
different
can
back
do it.
then, right? You know, you
There
know,
was nothing to eat back then.
I know, I know. I feel that way, and I've only been gluten free for 15 years, so I can't even imagine what you experienced. But yeah, I can relate to that so much. And when you're 26, you've got all these like I'm just a new adult person feelings, right? Like what am I going to
Yeah,
do in the world? How am I going to contribute? What path is for me? There's so many paths, and I just
right.
felt like because of the illness, it was really getting myself better was the only one. And it happened to be that through that, I found a calling to do something that was bigger and helped other people.
Well, and that was true for me too, because I had just, I saw this notice about this woman who was using nutrient therapy for addiction recovery. And that was curious to me. So I went and interviewed her and her nutritionist. And the nutritionist shook my hand and said, "You're hypothyroid." I said, "I am." The doctor says I'm fine. And she says, "You're not." So that caught my attention
Wow.
and made an appointment with her. And that appointment changed the entire trajectory of my life.
Isn't that incredible how, the right person at the right time can just fast track your healing and just show you something that is just so meaningful? I've had a few things like that in my journey,
Uh-huh.
and food being one where, it's kind of the reason why we do what we do is to be that for other people, right?
That's
To
right. That's
to
right.
see their story through what we know and say, "Wow, I think I can help you avoid what I went through and so much suffering." You know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's why I teach the school I do, the Academy for Addiction and Mental Health Nutrition, to teach other practitioners how to do this for their clients so it doesn't take their clients as many decades as it took me to get well.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. I love
yeah.
that.
So, the Autoimmune Protocol, the new autoimmune cookbook, um, you've got some questions that we can discuss here. So, how has this protocol evolved over time? And
Yeah.
what are
So
people getting right? And what are people maybe not getting right?
Yeah, so the Autoimmune Protocol has been around for about 15 years, but it's just an elimination protocol, and elimination protocols have actually been studied since the 60s. So it's this
Right.
idea that we are going to remove foods that are potential allergens or sensitivities or intolerances to a
Hmm.
particular person. We're going to leave them out for a period of time. Really, research shows us it needs to be at least 3 weeks. I recommend a month just to make sure that we get over that finish
Yeah.
line. And then you reintroduce foods one at a time to see how they affect you. And this process is, not new, but in this package of the autoimmune protocol, when I discovered it, a lot of other people were researchers and, functional medicine, nutrition community, ancestral nutrition community. They were all kind of coming to the same conclusion
Hmm.
based on research that was coming out about how specific foods interact with the immune system. And so there was this, theoretical
Right.
framework, the autoimmune protocol. It was basically a list of foods people with autoimmune disease could consider removing: grains, beans, legumes, eggs, nuts, seeds, and nightshade family vegetables. And really, it was that sentence from a couple of these different communities of researchers that didn't even have autoimmune disease were like, this is what we're seeing in the research. So myself, I'm online looking for answers. Some of my friends that I ultimately met through just sharing my story started blogging, which back in the day, I know it's hard to imagine people actually read blogs. This is before Instagram and, a lot of the social media. And I started blogging. I met a couple other women who'd had different autoimmune conditions who were also experimenting. We formed a little group, and out of this community, really the autoimmune protocol grew into, a larger global community because people started sharing their stories. So one of my friends has MS, another one has IBD, I have Hashimoto's and celiac, and we were
Hmm.
all seeing progress with this same framework of eliminating foods.
Yeah.
So we were all writing and
Sure.
publishing, and then with my cooking background, I'm like, I'm gonna write recipes, right? So AIP became this thing that was known mostly for the elimination phase. And if you were in a patient community, maybe you have psoriasis and you're in a Facebook group of psoriasis people, everyone's saying, hey, I did this and it worked for me. So it kind of spread like wildfire, right? But back then,
Hmm.
AIP, nobody, there's no one founder of this movement. It's actually kind of was like a group project, And I like to say it's had
Hmm.
a lot of curators over the years. I consider myself right now kind of curating the next wave. But really, there wasn't any guidance for how long do you do it? How do you reintroduce foods? What does it look like after you've gone through it? And so that is something that as a community we kind of have figured out over time. And so there was kind of this original autoimmune protocol and what I call now the core autoimmune protocol. That's kind of by the book what was, came together in the beginning. And starting about 10 years ago, medical teams started researching for specific conditions. So this was honestly pure luck. There was a patient in San Diego who had ulcerative colitis, told his doctor that he wanted to try AIP before having a bowel resection. This is a pretty intense surgery, right? There, with IBD, you have parts of your intestine that
Mhm.
are affected. Sometimes they have to go out and take out those diseased pieces and stitch them back together. So he's facing this surgery. His doctor says you can do this for 1 month. I don't really know that much about it, but go ahead and try. He comes back in a month. She does a colonoscopy. Everything's clear. And she's like, I need to learn more about what this is. And it happened to be that she was the head of
Right.
gastroenterology at Scripps. So this started off a series of 4 studies. I actually got an email from her saying, I am a researcher. I would love to study this diet. And I'm like, feel like I won the lottery, right? Like I'm just, over here writing
Sure.
cookbooks and trying to help people do it. But it's like, of course we want to study it. So from there have been 9 studies, 4 in IBD, so that's Crohn's and colitis, 2 in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, a couple in rheumatoid arthritis, 1 in eczema and psoriasis. And really, all of those research that has all been done in humans living their normal lives, using the autoimmune protocol for those different conditions. And the results show that about 3 out of 4 people get meaningful improvement from doing the elimination from their autoimmune symptoms. So, really incredible, and has also shown us that it's so effective that maybe that core autoimmune protocol might be too strict for some people. Because in this IBD
Mhm.
study, what they actually saw was 73% of these patients were in clinical remission in 6 weeks, which if you're in an IBD flare, like 6 weeks is a very quick amount of time, right? So we started thinking, maybe there's a second approach that can actually ease affordability, accessibility, the stress of implementation, because over time, that part of it
Mhm.
is really, really important also. And so now there's a modified protocol that has kind of come out of all of that research, and what really spurred me to write this new book.
My celiac disease my celiac symptoms lifted on day 5 because my nutritionist was trying a bunch of different things and nothing was working. I had crushing fatigue, joint pain, and soft stools. Um, and then I had depression and anxiety and stuff, but that was due to other things as well. Um, And she said, why don't you just try going off gluten for 5 days? So this is in 1990. And so I went off gluten because I would do anything at that point in time. I was that desperate. I understand that. And on day 5, I woke up and it felt like I was alive for the first time in my entire life. Now, that was just the beginning of my journey, because it turned out that, with leaky gut, I had a number of other food intolerances and allergies. So I had to have a very restricted diet for a while. And then, sort of like 4 food allergies long term came out of the mix that I had to avoid for a very long time. I don't anymore because I used NAET, the acupuncture protocol for several times, and that cleared everything but the celiac. But when, I called my mother and I said, Mom, my nutritionist thinks I might just have celiac disease. There was this dead silence. And she said, Oh, you were diagnosed with it when you were 2. But they didn't know the gluten connection when I was 2.
Wow.
So I grew up ill, and then I put on weight when I was 8, and therefore nobody was going to diagnose me with celiac disease at that point in time because I was putting on weight rather than being skin and bones. And so it got lost
Wow. I mean, that is just
until
such,
age 30.
I'm so sad for you, because it's so hard, I mean, especially as a child, or like my experiences as a young adult, but
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
Hashimoto's was missed because I was too thin. And, I would go in and they said, you don't look like someone with Hashimoto's, even though my body temperature was 93 degrees. And
Right.
we realized, like, I'm not anti the medical providers. They offer a really important service for us. But when you walk in and they're taking one look at you and saying, you can't
Mhm.
have X because of this, it's like we're all different. We all have
That's
these
right.
different things interacting together that might present a little bit different. And, that is just so sad that you went through a sick childhood that you didn't need to because you actually already had that information. Like, wow.
I really did. I had a full-blown medical diagnosis. But
Wow. It
when
breaks
the
my heart.
nutritionist and I identified it, she'd also asked that I make an appointment with a GI specialist
Mhm.
before we identified it, right? But then we identified it, and I finally got my appointment with the GI doctor. I went in and I said, I think I have celiac disease. He didn't ask why I said that. He didn't ever find out that I'd been diagnosed with it when I was 2. He literally looked me up and down and said, "No, you don't. No, you don't."
Yeah,
And I
it's so
walked
bad.
out of his office. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so bad. Yeah, as patients, I mean, autoimmune patients are constantly dismissed and gaslit. Like, that
Yeah.
is just the baseline experience. And then when you actually find a provider that is willing to take the time and listen, I mean, I have cried just from feeling heard,
Yeah.
after all of that traumatic experience with my diagnosis. I've encountered a
Right.
couple providers that actually take the time and listen, and you just like, it's really makes me emotional?
Yeah. Yeah. I ended up with a chip on my shoulder towards the medical profession for a very, very long time.
Yeah, same.
Because they had missed it. They'd blame my mother, they had blamed me, and they just were not, they had blinders on. And it took me a long time to forgive them for their blinders.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what's different now?
Yeah, so now, the autoimmune protocol, as I described, that what I'm calling now core AIP is kind of the original version. That's being preserved. So if somebody say they have IBD, they've heard about the IBD studies, they're in a flare, they're like, you know what, I just want to do what those patients did because I want that result. It's still there for you. And so in this
Mhm.
book, I outline two pathways in elimination. There's that core protocol, and now there's the modified protocol. But I'll be honest,
Okay.
I think anyone starting now should actually start with modified because I think modified is a protocol that is still evidence-based, but it has gone through the filter of that 15 years of the
Yeah.
people who have used it, all of this
Yeah.
medical research. I actually interviewed all of the researchers of the studies. I interviewed all the clinicians that I trained in the program and basically said, open call for everybody's feedback about the protocol. If we were to change it, what would you like to see? What are you seeing in your practice? And so
Mm-hmm.
modified came out of that, of kind of all of that information from the community. And it's really the best starting place based on the evidence that we have now, which I'm hoping will expand. 9 studies is still pretty small.
Sure.
These groups are,
Yeah.
15 to 30 people. But the next wave, like this is how research works. You start it in a pilot trial, you do a little group, you make sure it's safe, you make sure that there's something promising. Then you can get companies and, different organizations to invest in larger scale research. Maybe head to head, we do a core and a modified, but that's all going to come later. But for now, the modified protocol is really just the best place to start given everything we know now. And it's going to be cheaper, it's going to be easier to do, it's going to be a little more convenient. Of course, cutting out foods is never convenient,
Of
but
course
I've
it
really
is.
tried to set everybody up for success with everything in the book.
So, Mickey, what is the modified protocol?
Yeah, so on modified, we avoid grains except rice. Rice is allowed. We
Okay.
avoid all dairy except for
So
ghee.
excuse me. So
Yeah.
grains. So that includes your quinoa and your millet and your teff.
So grains, pseudo grains are an exception. And pseudo grains, the quinoa, the buckwheat, millet is actually a true grain, but quinoa and buckwheat are pseudo grains, and they are actually classified as seeds, which
Right.
are generally not allergenic or things that people are sensitive to. So with modified, we kind of split some more hairs and really try to focus on the foods that are a problem. The gluten, barley, oats, these are foods that not for everybody, but for a lot of autoimmune patients, these are the problem.
Right.
Rice, generally not a problem. Also, rice is very affordable. It's a good source of carbohydrates.
Hmm.
Should people choose to include it, it just makes it easier. So they avoid grains except rice. They can have the pseudo grains, so the quinoa and buckwheat. They can have legumes, so
Hmm.
lentils, black beans, except soy and peanuts. So those two are kind of in that high food
Because they're
sensitivity.
highly allergenic, aren't
Exactly.
they? Yeah.
Exactly. But when we look at like microbiome research, beans offer a lot of fiber for people that can tolerate them. Vegetarians now, some people come to this wanting to do it as a vegetarian, whereas previously it was unsafe. There was just not enough protein sources. We need
Right.
protein, right, to fuel our
Yeah.
bodies. So beans are included for that reason. Nuts are excluded. So nuts are highly allergenic foods for some people. Again, maybe you can reintroduce. And
So all
then
nuts, like including walnuts and
all
pecans.
nuts. Yep.
Okay.
Every nut. And then nightshade family foods are all
Right.
removed. So these are going to be your tomatoes and your chili peppers, potatoes, and even some supplements are sneaky sources of nightshade. So like ashwagandha
Uganda. Yeah.
is a nightshade. Yeah, which is a little tricky if somebody's on like an herbal formula. Trying to
And
think,
so is
eggs.
tobacco. Tobacco
Yes,
is a nightshade.
tobacco. Tobacco is a nightshade. Yep.
Yep.
Eggs are eliminated. Eggs are super allergenic, and it's actually usually the white that people are sensitive to, but we leave out the whole egg just to make it easy. And
Sure.
then in terms of dairy, ghee is allowed on modified, but all the other types of dairy are not. And that's because ghee is clarified butter, so it doesn't have any
It's
of the
just the fat.
proteins. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There are people out there, I've heard from them, that are sensitive to ghee. So,
Hmm.
some people have to be careful if you know you are highly allergic to dairy, just swap out a different cooking fat. But generally, we see it as pretty successful. So, those expanded lists of food, from the original protocol, it just makes it a little bit easier, right?
People can live with it.
Yeah, yeah, you can throw some nuts and seed or excuse me, you can throw some seeds on a salad. I like to do like some pumpkin seeds. You could do a porridge in the morning with like some buckwheat. Now you could do a smoothie, and this is
Pasha.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You could do a smoothie. So for people who also have chronic illness, low capacity days are a real thing. So being able to throw everything in a blender when you've got pea protein or rice protein or hemp protein and flax for fiber, you can create a meal that's just blended.
Hmm.
And for somebody who is dealing with any level of disability in their hands, arthritis, can't chop. I mean, that is really a meaningful addition for them to just be able to create something that they don't actually have to cook that is like a full meal. So modified really is a lot more approachable.
Okay. And so, what are some tips you have for people to live long term with these? Well, both how to reintroduce. We'll do that. We'll do introduction first, and then living long term with it.
Yeah, so the autoimmune protocol is done in three phases, no matter if you're doing core or modified AIP. The first phase is transition, and this is really the time that you're spending in preparation for actually making the change. So during transition, I like people to track their baseline symptoms just so that you kind of know where you're starting. I like to do a visioning exercise to clarify your personal health vision to kind of really hone in on why you're doing this and, something to fall back on when your motivation is feeling a little low. And then do a confidence assessment, which is an exercise that I have in the book, which helps you assess your readiness in different categories. So some people, they're great cooks, they have lots of tools. That's not the problem. They need to learn time management skills to figure out when they're going to cook and prep and organize their calendar. Other people don't have cooking skills. Maybe they eat takeout or they eat convenience foods constantly. And so that person is going to have to maybe spend some time on YouTube learning very basic cooking skills. You don't need expert level, but you need to know how to do a little chopping. You're going to need, a roasting dish or a soup pot. So kind of figuring out,
Right.
pre-solving those barriers. So then once you go through transition, you're ready to do that elimination. And that's what we were discussing before. This is the time.
And reading labels. You have to
Oh,
learn
yeah.
how to read labels.
And practice it. It's not something you're going to do tomorrow, right? You got to clear your pantry. You got to spend the time doing all those things so that when you're in elimination, this is the time when you're 30 to 90 days, so 1 to 3 months of elimination. You're doing this strictly. And you're eliminating all those foods we discussed before. So the grains, legumes, beans, eggs, nuts, seeds, and nightshades. Once you feel a measurable
Mhm.
improvement over baseline, now this is not full healing, this is not like a full recovery, and we can talk about that later, but you just need to, maybe if you had on a 1 to 10 scale in the transition phase, maybe your energy was a 5, maybe your joint pain was a 7. Now, during the elimination, your energy level is registering at like a 7, and your joint pain is at like a 4. That is measurable improvement. So you can now move on to
Yeah.
reintroductions where you start to test each food one by one. And I have lists and charts of 4 different stages. So you start with the foods that are least likely to cause a reaction and most nutrient
Right.
dense. You move on to the foods that are the hardest at the end because I want you to be able to expand your diet and move on from there. Because long term, the goal is to build a personalized diet that works for you, not,
Right.
somebody that like, Christina and I both have celiac disease, but I'm sure the foods that we tolerate are very different because each person
Mhm.
is an individual, right?
Right.
So long term, each person understands which foods are triggers. And I also hope that they have learned some foods that make them feel good because we're not just on hyper alert for foods that are making us feel bad, right? It's
That's a
like
good point.
with mental health, you have triggers for different thoughts and feelings, but you also have triggers for joy. You also have triggers for feeling good. So I want people to identify those. Like for me, I know that broths and cooked vegetables, fermented foods, lots of colorful food, fiber, these are things that make me feel good. So going forward, I'm sure to
Mhm.
include them in my diet and my maintenance plan going forward.
That's right. Because we want that enjoyment. We don't want to just feel restricted, just feel deprived. And I know for myself, way back when, it's been a long time now, but I had to go through a grieving period. I had to grieve eliminating these things from my diet. And as far as I knew, eliminating them, especially the gluten, forever and ever. Amen. And, I work with people with addiction. And a lot of people, especially with alcohol use disorder, can't imagine spending the rest of their lives without alcohol and how that will impact their social lives because alcohol is so much a part of socialization. Well, so is bread, so is
Yeah,
gluten, right?
yeah, yeah.
And learning how to navigate restaurants, with while avoiding these foods, learning how to navigate Sunday dinner with your family or a Christmas party, right?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
going to a conference and all the food is provided and it's like, what about me?
Yeah, I mean, Christina, you could actually probably teach me a master class in that because really the
Yeah,
addiction community, I think learning how to get over those hurdles for the long term. I mean, how I feel about it as a patient myself and somebody that has a lot of food allergies is that the longer that I do this and the more that I feel personally connected to my personal health vision and my wanting to feel good in my own body, the easier it is to set those boundaries, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And for me, it wasn't, at first, because I used to be very shy. And the idea of, letting somebody know I was going over to their house for dinner and letting them know that I'm sorry, so sorry, but, please make sure that at least some of the dishes do not contain gluten. And they'll ask, well, what's gluten? And it was like, okay,
Uh-oh. Yeah.
and they sort of swallow. So I had to learn how to advocate for myself and how to be assertive. And, it was really hard for me. But if I made a mistake and I got introduced to gluten in those early days, I was non functional for the next week. Now I've, so much more healthy that I can make a mistake and I can be okay. My gut can,
Yeah, you bounce
hold
back
its own.
faster.
Exactly, exactly. But back in the day, And so it was like, I tried not to be obsessive, but I was obsessive. And this, of course, is where the danger is of moving into orthorexia,
Hmm.
because we have to be very, very careful.
Hmm.
But then again, we have to be careful in an emotionally healthy way, in a
Hmm.
non-controlling way, in a non-rigid way, while still holding the boundaries, in
Hmm.
a loving way. We don't want to yell at our family members if they take us to a restaurant where we can eat exactly one thing on the menu.
Yep, yep. Or like my family member who every family gathering says, "Can't you just have a bite? I made this special for everyone." And by the fourth time, it's like, "No, I can't have a bite. I want to give her a medical like view of what happens in my intestines when I have that bite." But I just say, "No, thank you. I'm good."
That's right.
You know, learning over the years what sometimes less information is more. I mean, we could talk on and on about strategies, but I think really the foundation is feeling good yourself and seeking that, not seeking control, which I think can be very tempting to cross that line,
That's
but
right.
really just seeking health for myself. And whenever I get in a sticky situation, I like to remind people this is something that I do for my health. Thank you for respecting it. And there's really nothing anyone can say to that. You know what I mean? It's really hard for
Well,
them to weasel in a guilt trip or something.
and especially if you throw in the words medical diagnosis, not just this is a preference. Oh, you just don't like gluten. No, I actually have a medical disorder called celiac disease. And this is what it means. And so if I eat that, I'm going to get really sick.
Yeah, it's not worth it. And they always say like, "Well, don't you just want a little?" And it's like, "No, I've
Right.
actually probably not in my best mood at a dinner party said, "No, thank you. I don't want diarrhea for 2 weeks." Like it's not hard for me to say no. Sometimes push me far enough, you know. But really it comes from time, and I aspire to always respond in kindness, which it's always going to be hardest when
Right.
you're with your family
You
and
want to be
your
kind.
closest people who are kind of, they're just annoyed by always having to go to a special restaurant or always having to have, a list of what's in the food. But really, I mean, foundationally, if they want to see you thrive and they want to see you healthy, they will come around.
That's right. That's right. For my family, it was learning how to make turkey gravy with
Mm.
neither cornstarch nor flour at Thanksgiving.
I mean, arrowroot and tapioca work great.
It worked beautifully.
Yeah. Or even cassava flour.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. But to teach your family that, okay, well, you can make the your wheat-based gravy, and I'm going to make my tapioca-based gravy, and please don't pour it over the turkey before I cut myself a slice.
Yes. Yes.
And
Please
would you
don't
mind doing the stuffing on the side? Well, we'll have stuffing on the side. And then I bring my own gluten-free stuffing, which
smart.
everybody actually loves.
Of course, because it probably has a lot of the good bits, that are super
Yeah.
tasty and less of the bread, which no one cares about. Yeah, I'm always
Exactly.
negotiating there's the gluten-free pie and the non-gluten-free pie and the utensil living with the pie. I'm always like putting them on opposite sides of the room. I'm just like, we're gonna protect the gluten-free pie over here. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Exactly. But you see, I think this is a really important discussion we're having because so many people, when they first take this on, feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
Like, how on earth am I going to navigate this? How on earth am I going to do this? And again, this is true for people with alcohol use disorder learning to live a normal social life without alcohol. Is
Well,
there's this
actually,
transition
Christina, yeah, you actually said the exact thing that happens is you learn, right?
you learn,
You don't just read
and
a
then it
book
becomes
and
second
then
nature.
know. Exactly. It's only effort until it's a routine. So in the beginning, you go through this process, you change your diet. Maybe when you're in the elimination phase, it feels very hard. But guess what?
Mhm.
When you start feeling better, like you on day 5 of gluten free, and you say that you woke up in a body that you were like, this is new to me, that feeling, that visceral feeling of feeling well, I mean, you don't want to do anything to get rid of that, right? And so
Uh,
it becomes so much easier when you have that experience, like, I know
that
that this is
motivation.
changing me and making me feel good, then it becomes easy, right?
That's right.
So I think you said that beautifully.
Yeah. It becomes easy, it becomes second nature. And I don't have a problem anymore, because I've just learned my workaround, but I've also learned that no, if it's a little challenging, I don't just give in because it's not worth it to me to give in because it's a little challenging to figure out what to eat. And
Exactly.
I discovered the fast food restaurants where you can get your bunless, the best bunless hamburger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't do that very often because there's still the danger of contamination, but sometimes you're stuck out there
Oh yeah,
and
airports. You got to do the
exactly,
best you can.
got to do the best you can. But the fact is, there is always what I've discovered 40 years of doing this, there is always an option. There is always a workaround. There is never actually an excuse.
Yeah, I totally agree. And especially now where there's so much more awareness of food sensitivities and so many more options in different places. I mean, I've traveled all over the world and I find that, have not been anywhere yet where I haven't been able to find food that works for me.
Exactly. Now, you do have to learn a few tricks. Like if you can tolerate soy, you still can't have soy sauce because
Yep.
for most soy sauces, the first ingredient is after the water is wheat. It comes even before the soy,
Yep.
right? But then there's tamari sauce, which can come wheat free.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So learning these tricks, that's that transition phase where you learn the tricks.
Yep, yep. Reading the labels and then long term, once you reintroduce, you really understand, is this a food that is a major trigger for me, or is this what I call a gray area food? So,
Right,
gray area foods are kind of those ones that you reintroduce them and they might make you feel off, or maybe if you eat them once, you're fine, but then you eat them a couple days later and then you're not fine. So these are foods where maybe a quantity, maybe combining with another food or even like a mental state, like maybe when you're really stressed. I've actually worked with a lot of people who had some gray area foods that find that when they're on vacation, they actually can tolerate a lot more foods. And guess what's
right.
happening when you're on vacation? Like you're not stressed, you're not working, right? So our mental state really has a lot to do with the way that our immune system is interacting with foods. So, yeah, there's a lot there to learn. And I just love thinking of it as this lifelong learning project, figuring out what works for us because that's also going to change as we get older, right? Like, I
It
am
does change.
just.
Yeah.
We turned 41 last week, and I'm just going through perimenopause. So my hormones are starting to change. I'm noticing some changes. And I really think that the change in hormones and food sensitivities is starting to hit me now in a way that I have had smooth sailing for the last 10 or so years, and that's very real. So I have this experience that I have this background where I know how to test things and kind of be a detective and be like, okay, this isn't working for me now, even if it worked for me in the past.
Right.
Being able to take something out or even the reverse, add something in that, is kind of a new tolerance, which sometimes happens to people too.
Yeah, I go through phases actually with milk that initially I could not tolerate any milk at all because I would get severe muscle pain.
Hmm.
So fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, the whole thing before those terms were, even real. Um, and milk gave me that fibromyalgia, um, muscle pain. And then after a couple of years after healing, it didn't anymore. And then after a couple of decades, I became lactose intolerant. I was never lactose intolerant before. And then all of a sudden, I started getting diarrhea whenever I had, things with ordinary milk in them. I used to put, milk in my tea. And all of a sudden, I thought it was the tea, and I discovered that it was the milk in the tea that was giving me the diarrhea.
Yep.
And then I had to give up. I can still do cheese if I'm careful, but, so yeah, things come and go.
Hmm.
But at the beginning, you know, and this was sort of its own separate discovery, I would get these horrific migraines, and they were not connected to my period. I didn't know what was causing them, but they would really, really take me down. And then we were visiting my mother-in-law, and we had was I gluten? Yeah, I was gluten free. Um, we had chicken for dinner, roast chicken, and then we left and started driving home. It was a 2-day drive, and we stopped at Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I got the roasted chicken, not the deep fried chicken. And within half an hour, I started getting this horrific migraine. I mean, to the point that we actually had to go to a random emergency room.
Mm.
Okay. And it was like, well, isn't that interesting? I had chicken yesterday, and then I had chicken today, and half an hour after eating chicken today. I didn't get a headache after eating chicken yesterday, but I got it within half an hour of eating chicken today. Hmm. And what I discovered is that I was perfectly okay if I ate chicken once a week. And for a lot of food allergies, it takes, 4 days to get the allergen out of your system. And I found that I could eat chicken every 7 days. But if I had leftover chicken within that 7 day period, I would get this horrific migraine. And then a couple of years ago, I redid all my NAET acupuncture, and now I can have chicken leftovers.
Yay. Yeah. It is just so amazing how really being in tune to your body instead of jumping to conclusions and saying, I can never eat this again, really thinking of it as being curious and working on a project and yeah, seeing what the boundaries of tolerance are, which can be a little uncomfortable sometimes, but then figuring out how to work that in as your microbiome and your immune system kind of change. Yeah, you might find some surprises. I have a similar experience to you with dairy. I actually used to have an anaphylactic reaction to dairy growing up. And all through my time in AIP, totally dangerous. Throat swells up, and I've had it happen in restaurants before, like really uncomfortable, really scary. And in the last year, so I was talking about, my perimenopause adventure, which, some things I've had some negatives, but actually one of the good things is all of a sudden I can tolerate dairy. So not all dairy. I'm at hard cheese, but butter and hard cheeses. And I actually found out because I was on vacation and I was at a restaurant that had gluten and dairy-free food, and I had the same breakfast a few days in a row, and I didn't know that I thought it was a coconut, like yogurty type cheese spread. I thought it was dairy-free because they had been serving me all this gluten and dairy-free food, and on the third day I realized like, oh no, that's actually cheese. And I feel fine, you know? So I would never have even tried it. I was so scared of it. But now I'm able to have, once a week, a little bit of hard cheese or butter and something, and I'm
Nice,
fine. And that has been a
nice.
lifelong allergy for me. So just goes to show that things really
Well,
can
that's
change
something to
over
be
time.
grateful for. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
Something we really haven't touched on that I think is crucial is that these food intolerances and food allergies can also create major mental health symptoms. And in fact, every single mental health diagnosis in the book can be caused by a food intolerance.
Absolutely. And, to add to that, Christina, for anybody who is in like on the journey of getting diagnosed, this is especially problematic because people go to their healthcare providers and they're complaining of all these symptoms. And what happens? They get told that they have mental health issues, which sometimes those are mixed in and dovetailing together, but a lot of times people are inflamed and eating a diet that is just not a match for
Right.
them. And then they end up with a prescription for an antidepressant, and they're not actually getting help for their autoimmune symptoms. And they may be completely missing that the food is a part of the picture for them. And that just breaks my heart.
Well, and we can come back around to that, but there is a small subset, and I don't know how small it is because I don't know to what degree this has been researched, but there is a subset of people with alcohol use disorder who cannot stop drinking while they continue to eat gluten, that they
Mm.
are actually gluten intolerant, whether it's full blown celiac disease or just gluten sensitivity, I don't know. But there are people who, as long as they're eating gluten, the cravings for alcohol is so strong that they can't overcome it. The moment they give up gluten, they can give up the alcohol.
Yeah, Christina, this is just me remembering something that I went through in my master's program, so I don't have any, receipts to back it up. But to your point, I remember learning that the B vitamin deficiency that comes with celiac disease. So with celiacs, we have all these cilia, these hair-like structures in the intestine. This is what's absorbing our food. When you have celiac and you're eating gluten, that's just sloughed off, right? All that is just the digestive
All
capacity is just
flattens.
gone, right? And so the ability to digest and absorb nutrients like B12 and other B vitamins and iron and even minerals is just completely flatlines. And so what I learned was actually the craving for alcohol, and especially, a lot of these drinks have a lot of B vitamins in them. So part of that is just them
Beer,
trying.
beer.
Beer has a lot of B vitamins. It's just them trying to bring that back into their system. That might be a part of that craving because the celiac is just destroying their digestive capacity and their microbiome, you know?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I had a client years ago now. He walked into my office rip roaring drunk. And I actually used the amino acid glutamine to get his brain functioning so we could have a real session. And he was so impressed by the fact that I could get rid of his drunkenness using this amino acid that he came back the following week sober and we could actually have a real intake. And I always ask people, two questions. One, have you ever had a period of sobriety? And he said, yeah, a couple of years ago, for a whole 2 years, I was able to stay alcohol free with no problem. And then he said, I don't know what happened. I just started drinking again and can't stop. And then I asked, have you or anybody in your family ever been diagnosed with celiac disease or gluten intolerance, gluten sensitivity? And he says, funny you should ask. My sister a couple of years ago got diagnosed with celiac disease, and she talked me into going gluten free for a couple of years.
Yep. Ding, ding, ding.
And I said, hmm, those couple of years that you were gluten free, did they by any chance coincide with your alcohol free? And he said, yes, it was the same time period. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was the last drink that man ever had.
Amazing.
Then he worked with me for a while. And after, several months, summer came in Denver and he and his buddies went backpacking and he hadn't quite figured out how to really do this gluten-free thing. So his buddy was responsible for all the food on this backpacking trip. I, of course, brought all the gluten-filled stuff. So he spent 3 days eating gluten on this backpacking trip. Walking back into town, they walked past the bar. Now, he didn't even notice the bar leaving town, but walking back into town, this bar was calling his name. And this bar was saying, I'm here. You're hot. You're tired. Don't you want a nice cold one? But he realized he was smart enough to realize what had happened is that
Mm.
he'd been eating
Wow.
gluten. his
Mhm.
alcohol craving kicked in, and he was able to walk past the bar, get safely to his hotel room, stop eating gluten, and he was okay. But it could have gone the other direction really, really easily. And from that point on, he took responsibility for his own food on his backpacking trips.
Yep. Wow. Well, personal responsibility when you learn something about your body and what you need. I mean, that's really the best thing that you can hope for as a coach is to really teach people, that they have the information to put in the practice to do the thing that helps them feeling good. And of course, you
That's
can't
right.
always be perfect, but when you get in a little speed bump, just being able to remember your why and the tools that you have and the knowledge
Yeah.
because before he worked with you, he didn't know that, which,
Yeah.
that's so empowering and really a testament to the great work that you do. So I love that.
So, final question before we stop. Other autoimmune disorders, so things like lupus or Sjogren's or, one of the multitude of autoimmune disorders, how did they respond to a food elimination process?
Yeah, so this is a great question. There are over 100 autoimmune conditions. And so, something that I'm very excited about in the next wave of research is actually researching some of the rare ones. So, I'm
Mhm.
actually personally putting together a study in myasthenia gravis, which is a neuromuscular junction. It's a pretty rare autoimmune condition, but there have been zero dietary studies for any types of diets for MG. So I'm hoping that our
Mm.
team is going to put together and do the first one using AIP. I can tell you anecdotally, there are people across all different types of conditions, not just these ones that have been studied, that report success on AIP. And I actually have a section on one of my websites, autoimmunewellness.com. It's called The Stories of Recovery. And if you go to the site, you search that,
Mm.
and there's an index page that comes up with over 75 stories from patients in their own words. Just people who have written to me, shared their story, their diagnosis, some pictures, just so that we can kind of see who they are, and really the things that helped them move through the autoimmune protocol, the changes they saw. A lot of these people have very rare and complex web of different autoimmune conditions. So, one of the things
Mhm.
that's hard in the study setting is like with this IBD study, they don't want anybody that has a different autoimmune disease in addition, right? But we know that, like as an autoimmune patient, I have three, polyautoimmunity, so multiple conditions in one
It's
person, is
normal.
just normal. It's so common. So,
That's right.
actually
That's
finding
right.
people like the Hashimoto's group, finding 17 people that only had Hashimoto's. I mean, that was actually really, really difficult.
Mhm.
So, if you want to read some of these stories, this index on my website has a collection of just stories from people who sometimes have
Nice.
2 to 5 different conditions. Sometimes they have non-autoimmune conditions that are kind of woven in, like Lyme or mold illness or, complex things that people are
Good.
dealing with. So, and what I would
Good.
say if you're hesitant to get started, give it a try. If anything,
Yeah,
it
give it a
doesn't
try.
work, you're gonna learn
Give it a
how to
month.
cook,
All your
you
office a
know?
month. Or like for me, it was 5 days and
Yeah.
it was as clear could
Yeah.
be.
Yeah, yeah. And you don't really know what you're going to get until you try. So,
Right.
and for that, 3 out of 4, we really see improvement in the studies. That fourth person, I can tell you from working one-on-one, is usually someone who just needs a smart provider to help
Yeah.
them on their way. So it just might be that there's some other roadblock, a gut issue that needs treatment, a nutritional approach. Maybe they have a nutrient deficiency that's unresolved. Having a smart provider to just help with that troubleshooting, I think really helps get over the finish line for that last person who maybe on their own doesn't see success.
Well, this has been a wonderful, enlightening conversation
Oh, thank you, Christine. I really enjoyed.
and fun.
I agree.
Yeah. 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 It's been fun. So, you mentioned your website and its URL, and all this information will be in the show notes. But how can people get a hold of you if they want to continue this conversation with you?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So I actually have two websites. So the autoimmuneprotocol.com has all of the protocol instructions. I don't gatekeep that. I really believe that everyone should have this information. So that's where everything lives. Autoimmunewellness.com is kind of where all the recipes are. So there's 500 recipes just for free on the site. There's some meal plans. There's all of those stories. That's kind of where you go for inspiration. I'm also on social media at Mickey Trescott. You can find me anywhere. My new book, The New Autoimmune Protocol, is just kind of all the information you need to get started with the autoimmune protocol, either core or modified, including recipes and meal plans. You can pick that up wherever books are sold, including on Kindle. It's available all around the world.
Nice.
So, yeah, thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate it.
You're so very welcome. And thank you for showing up here today.
Thanks.
And thank you all for listening to this episode of Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. If you enjoyed it, please push the like button and the subscribe button and share it with anybody whom you think might benefit. See you next time. Thank you for tuning in to Power Up Recovery with Nutrition. I'm Christina Veselak, your host, and I hope today's episode has inspired and equipped you with new insights and tools to support your recovery journey or practice. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who could benefit from the knowledge shared here. Stay connected with us for more episodes filled with practical advice, expert wisdom, and inspiring recovery stories. Remember, nutrition is a powerful tool in mental health and relapse prevention. Power up your recovery today. I'm Christina Veselak, and I'll see you next time.